Hello and welcome to the program. My name is Michael Finney. Today, I am joined by Clawson Smith. Would you like to say hello, sir?
Yeah, what's up, man?
Hey, good to have you on. We're going to talk about writing. We're going to talk about books. We're going to talk about the scene surrounding that, maybe even algorithms. But let's start at the beginning. Tell us about your background in writing, maybe what drew you to it, what interests you, influences, anything along those lines. Where'd you start?
Well, first off, I never thought I would write. So there's that. Kind of took me totally by surprise. But the long and short of it is I started in college. I was a art school, just like an art school loser, kind of. And I was just for fun writing like a few little like things here and there. I ended up writing like a short story. And my professor, like I had like a 2D professor who's actually like an accomplished professor, like an accomplished artist, I should say, like 2D, 3D design. I mean, like 3D in a sense, like he's like a 3D artist, but he taught 2D design. And he really liked my stuff. And I ended up sending him like a beta copy of like my short stories. And he just flat out told me that I should just like drop out of college and write. And I didn't like take his advice like super seriously. And then the longer I stayed, and this is like for graphic design, so that was going to be my field, my career. I quickly realized that a lot of these guys were just like monkeys. Like graphic designers are just like they're monkeys working for somebody else. Dance monkey dance kind of thing, which like ironically now has just been replaced with AI. So I ended up taking his advice and kind of taking a break, like a leap year, working full time as a graphic designer, which I was able to get an entry level job. And I just wrote on the side, published my first book in 2017, and then kind of subsequently written like anthologies, like wrote a few books. And then I kind of took a break in about 2019, 2020. I wrote another series of books. I wrote Goonhood, which was a nonfiction book, sort of kind of like like my version of like an esoteric approach to life. Like I read a lot of like Nietzsche, and I just was really inspired to write something like that. And so I ended up writing this book in 2020, publishing it. It kind of got big on like micro niche sort of right wing Twitter, and then and not super big, but I mean I sold a couple thousand copies. I wrote and published a sequel to the book a few years ago. Didn't really get as much traction, and then I just have been swept up in other stuff, so I just really haven't written as much. And in the last year or two, I decided to kind of step back in with my original kind of inspiration, which was fiction, but this time a little bit of a different approach. So as far as inspiration goes, I've been a huge reader since I was a kid. So I read all the Harry Potter books, I think like in first grade, like the ones up to the point they'd been published. And then I read them as they came out after. So I've just been like always been like a book fiend.
Who are some of your favorite writers besides J.K. Rowling?
Back then, I have no idea.
Well, it doesn't even have to be back then. It could be now, even.
I'm thinking back then. Like I read like tons of young adult fiction. I'd say back then. I mean, every kid likes Tolkien. Not every kid, but I really like Tolkien. I read Tolkien really early on, probably way earlier than I know. Like a teacher of mine didn't believe me that I read The Two Towers, and she actually like pulled my parents aside and said I was like lying or something, and she got really mad at me, which was cool because I got to like dunk on her at our parent teacher conference and tell her like about the ends and stuff. I really enjoyed the Redwall series by Brian Jacques. That was like I'd say probably the three major influences of my writing were the Redwall series, like Brian Jacques, Hatchet.
Classic.
Yeah, the classic Hatchet. Like I was a Boy Scout, I loved Hatchet. I love like survival books. And then the third one was probably I'd have to say just a kind of collection of military history books, or like and just history in general. I took a huge liking to Bernard Cornwell when I was like in high school, and he just kind of blew my mind as far as like how you could write something that was like more or less like real, or like it was like a fiction but set in a historical setting. Like his Archer's Tale series, his Burning Land saga. I kind of have dabbled in his other series. Like I know he did Sharp's Rifles is super popular. There's like a Revolutionary War one I read a little bit of. I'm trying to think like what else. Definitely, I'd say Bernard Cornwell for sure. He was huge. That got me into. In high school. I read like a lot of not just military journals. We were assigned to read like like the Kite Runner and like that kind of stuff.
Sure.
Like Global War on Terror, make you feel bad for people in the Middle East or whatever kind of books. Which by the way, like all they did for me, I remember like when I was in high school, I had to read those books, and I remember I read one, and it was just like about how like there were like American soldiers that were like marching around and doing patrols and getting ambushed by insurgents, and then there's some girl, and then she got like raped by her uncle, and that somehow was supposed to be like it's supposed to teach you about how like America is bad or something. And I remember I like turned to my teacher and I was like, this is like, so like we're supposed to be there, like these people are just this is the main inspiration for Pray for the Birds, by the way. Not really, but yeah, I really liked historical fiction. That really got me. And Bernard Cornwell, by the way, for most people who don't know, Bernard Cornwell inspired George R. R. Martin. Like George R. R. Martin, like shamelessly stole a lot from Bernard Cornwell, and Bernard Cornwell wrote his books with the purpose of like he read firsthand sources of the medieval period, and then he wrote very believable, very good characters that would have existed in that time period. I know that some people don't like it. I know there's some people who don't like him as much because, especially like on our side of Twitter, because he like isn't super big fan of the Christian world, or at least like the Christianity in the sense that like it was like the one good religion or something that was like wholly a good thing. I think Bernard Cornwell kind of approaches it from a very cynical lens. George R. R. Martin took that and went completely agnostic. And obviously like that's where Game of Thrones, like that's where its roots come from, is from that like that kind of flair and theme. And then like I also read like Clive Cussler. I read Jack or Tom Clancy, is it Jack Vance? I'm trying to remember all the different titles he did. Tom Clancy. I read. There was another one. My dad loves like John Grisham and stuff. So I read that kind of stuff. I read like the corporate lawyer fiction, which I actually really enjoyed. Really like that kind of stuff. I haven't read it for a long time, but yeah, pretty much that. I'd say like that. I gravitate now more toward. I mean, like my number one, like the number one author I tell people that I like to probably out of the two most, I'd say, or no, Jack Vance would be the writer. Dying Earth series by him, and then Glenn Cook's Black Company, or just Glenn Cook in general. Those two authors probably right now, I think, are severely like grossly underappreciated.
Who are some of your favorite authors maybe on the scene right now? Who are you reading amongst the folks that we know?
See, this is where I'm gonna show my true colors. I have not read anything from people on our scene from a long time.
Shame.
And that's mainly because I haven't read for a while. I just started reading again like a few months ago.
Well, you've been turning stuff out too, though. That's the other side of it. You know, you're busy producing. It's hard to read and produce.
It is. Yeah. You want to read. I have a stack of books. I went through my one redeeming quality why I don't get thrown in the right wing writing gulag is I did buy a bunch of books from people, and I have them sitting on a stack. I will read them eventually, and I look forward to reading them. There's a couple that I've read that I really liked. I can't remember their names for the life of me, but our site produces good stuff. I'll say that. Like people here, they really care about good writing. So no one put me in the guillotine yet. I'll eventually get to their books too. I'm in the midst of finishing editing a 500-page book. Yeah. So it just takes up all of your time. on top of everything else that I already have going on. So
let's talk about the craft of writing. You're in the middle of finishing a book. How do you approach writing? Where do you start? Is it with an idea? Is it with characters? Tell us about the way that you do it.
So I'll tell you the way that some people do it, which is
tell us the way that you do it.
Well, some people are more organized than me, and it makes me feel.
It doesn't. We're here to talk to you, Clawson.
That's true. Well,
we want to hear how you do it.
What I do is I have my ideas are in a cave, and then I pull them out of the cave and I light them on fire, and then in the ashes I scrawl little sentences, and that's my writing.
That's good.
It's totally from the seat of my pants. But yeah, okay. So if we want to talk about the craft side, I think the way I look at it is I think about so for this recent book, it's all from the perspective of one guy, except for, there's like a small little, the epilogue, you have like this narration that's in someone else's head, obviously, like a little bit of head hopping. But this book is primarily from one character's perspective, which, by the way, that's not like been my style from the very beginning. In fact, actually, that was my number one complaint I got when I published my first book in 2017, was people kept saying, I like this, but you head hop way too much. And you're going way too crazy. Like, I don't know who's saying what or thinking what or whatever. So nowadays, like, especially with this new book, the way I look at it is I like brevity. I don't like unnecessary.
You got a 500-page book.
Well, yeah, but like it's all like most of it is just it's dialogue and it's action. I would say there's very little exposition.
Right.
There's some, but it's sprinkled. Exposition as in a one sentence about like what a part of a city might feel like. I don't like describing them either. The way I like it, here's how I like it, and here's how I write now. I'd like to think my readers, and I do believe this, my writers are smart people. They don't need me to tell them that somebody's face is very proportional and looks like like a cologne model or something. I don't need to describe them how many hills there are and just what trees are there. Maybe one particular tree to get a feel for it if you're in a different terrain or something. It doesn't really matter. I want as far as the stories I write now and I'd say how my style, my voice has changed, and like what you'll find my writing currently is I would like to tackle things of the social confrontation and the grappling of people actually dealing with, uncomfortable situations and confrontations that they're not expecting, and it playing out in a way that, that you would actually see at like that. That's what I was saying about like when I was thinking about like the John Grisham novels or the Tom Clancy. A lot of these characters, like they're not perfect, and they don't know everything is about to happen. And as a writer, I like to foreshadow things for my readers, but I like my readers kind of having to guess. And I like them having to create in their own heads what people may look like. So for me, I like to feel like when I write the craft, I like the feel of dialogue. I like the feel of how the words sound. And I like abrupt descriptions and things kind of scattered throughout, almost to kind of pull you out. If it seems like a poem, something will come at you out of the left field like a arrow, just like shooting into a conversation over tea and just shattering one of the cups. And not just for the sake of it, like not just to invert values of traditional like literature or fiction, but in the sense that like things aren't perfect, and the picturesque scene should be, presented in a way that it plays out exactly how in my world how it should. So yeah, that if that makes sense, like I like that. I like setting things up in a way, especially this most recent book, where you can actually kind of get into the character's head and you can actually follow him along from one side of not having any belief in anything to ending with him being very strongly convicted almost a zealot or a madman at the end. So
you're focused on characters, less on world building.
yes, but the world building, I think, is already there. You just have to kind of you may have to read the book a couple times to realize you might have missed something. I like hiding things throughout the writing. That's what Glenn Cook does, and I love Glenn Cook for that. That's why I reread his books constantly. I've reread The Black Company so many times, and every time I find something new in it.
A good book does that, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that the longer I read and I write is the more I appreciate the small things and not the grandiose things.
How many books have you written so far?
Oh, let me think about that. I've written. Let's see. So I've written, published.
Yeah.
Published books. I have published. Let's see. 1, 2, 3. I think this would be my 9th one.
Wow. Yeah, that's power.
8th or 9th book. Yeah. But as far as like that you can find, that you can actually read, 5 or 6. I've taken off. I've like depublished 2 of them. 2, 3. No, that math doesn't check out. I've removed, I think, 3 books from Amazon that I originally started with.
Now they're exclusives.
Yeah, you can't find the first 3 books I wrote. I don't want you to find them.
Why? You don't like them anymore?
No.
That's interesting.
I don't think any writer does, to be honest with you. I don't think anybody who writes like is very happy with their initial work. They may be like satisfied, or they might be surprised to go back and find they enjoy some things that they wrote, but they're not going to be like very impressed with themselves. They might be like, oh, like I did a pretty good, okay job there. I forgot about that. And then they're going to be disappointed for the rest of it. At least that's how I look at it.
It's interesting how you find that in arts in general, where bands will put out maybe early material and then they're like, well, we gravitated into this other side of things, but fans lock on to maybe those first handful of records and then they end up playing that stuff live for years. I don't know if that necessarily translates over to the author side of things. It's not as if we that are putting out books are out there performing our books. So there's a little bit of a disconnect there, but I think that, you carry readership on along through the course of that. Maybe earlier books become more popular or whatever, whether it's by limiting access or just the time that elapses, the conversations around those things. I mean, yeah, there's lots of prolific writers, but still people kind of dial into maybe a handful of works or less, in that sense.
It's okay. So the reason why I think what the difference between writing and perhaps music is the fact that, for one, like writing, a good writing is refinement. You're taking essentially, like, I think what I was trying to get at and what I've come to realize is that the best writers, there was someone that said it in like our group chat yesterday, but it's like aim small, miss small, right? So you're basically taking, like, if you want to get like the best book possible, you're going to want to start with a smaller, like, you don't want to have too many variables. You don't want to have too much that you're trying to cover. You're not going to try to cover you can't cover a 1,000-year period as well as you could cover a 1-year period, if that makes sense. Like, you can a 1,000-year period, but you're going to be glossing over a lot of things. And I'm not saying that quantity is, obviously quantity is a quality all of its own, but in writing, limitation is far better than the opposite. Because in the same way that, like, we've been inundated with like comic book movies and just like junk slop content for the last, like, probably more, like, we've probably noticed it more in the last decade or two. But like, especially nowadays, if you go to the movie theater, like, nobody's interested in going to the movies. Like, they only want to see reruns because, the new stuff now, like, say, let's take like Marvel, for example. There's no rules. They're going to rewrite, and they're going to go from, okay, we're only fighting people that live on Earth, to let's just open up to the entire universe. and then the multiverse or whatever you want to call it, garbage. And also now because there's no limitation, uh, it feels fairly cheap, and it feels rough. It feels like you're not getting the final version of an idea or of a plot. You're getting the first rough cut. There's something that my friends and I used to do. So a lot of books I write are based off of, and this most recent one is based off of like a tabletop series. Friends of mine I've known for years, we run these games and we've been running them for years, and they're basically story games. So they're 100% about stories and character development.
That's interesting. You're the second person I've talked to in the last week that has had this example. In fact, there's a lot of this going on.
There's a lot more going on. I think, well, so for example, The Black Company was also a tabletop series written by, Vietnam War vets. So they were all Vietnam War vets who all ran a game together in a fictional universe, but they applied what they had gone through in Vietnam into the world. Same thing goes with my friends of mine. A lot of us are military. A lot of us are, one guy's a search and rescue guy. One guy is special forces. Another guy is an engineer. So the way we look at how we build out our world and how we, our games, our story games run through them is much more akin to like a nonfiction crime novel than it would be like, say, a Brandon Sanderson-esque like slop world or something like slop content. And I think that the limitation on what, for one, older media had, and what I'd say what how we approach it, where we use a thing called we have this system called Microscope that we use, where it's actually it's built to build worlds. It's a world building. I can't remember who made it. It was it's designed to for people to create worlds, and we use it to refine and kind of zoom in on a lens of what we want to be playing in. So for us, it was let's take Baghdad, and let's make it like Baghdad built over ancient Sumeria or ancient Egypt, and then let's put in the Caliphate. Let's put in the Middle Age, right before taking Jerusalem. That was basically our inspiration for this world. And then my character was the rooster. So I'm speaking from my own character's perspective. And I think that what people really, when you want to talk about good writing, I'm not saying my writing is phenomenal or anything, but the writing I enjoy and the writing I try to emulate is writing that really tries to refine and reduce and really only keep the gems, and really try to reduce and make it streamlined, especially for pacing. Because I think another thing too is that a lot of the stuff that we're presented to, fiction media now, is a lot of it could you're watching something and you're okay, half this movie could be you don't need this. For example, my wife and I just went and watched Star Wars Episode 3. They re-released it in theaters. There's a huge span of events. Most of that movie is foreshadowing. I don't know how you feel about the prequels, but the most of the movie takes place in a series of chambers and rooms talking about the political events happening all over the Star Wars universe galaxy, and how this war is coming to an end, and the kind of the plots and the subplots of the Emperor, the Chancellor Palpatine, Anakin, the Jedi Council, how there's all these kind of different political powers that are making moves, and those characters that are represented. People love that movie, and there's good action in it, but the majority of the movie until the very end is just dialogue, and it's plots, it's political espionage, and it's court intrigue. I think that is, and it's crazy how popular that movie is. Now take a Marvel movie that could be 100% action, and it's going to bore people to tears. They're going to be asleep. how do you explain that, right?
Nostalgia, rejection of the sequel trilogy. There's a lot of factors. And if the points you're making here, right, in this court intrigue and the plots, why does that not extend to Attack of the Clones?
I think it does.
Less.
I think the court intrigue of the third movie was much more interesting than the second movie is good. I'm like one of the people that I think Attack of the Clones was actually a fairly good movie. And it had a lot of mythology embedded. I mean, like George Lucas is a fanatic for Joseph Campbell, and it's present in all of his movies. I think the thing episode 3 did better than episode 2 is I think we can all agree that fiction, the villain makes a fiction. Like the villain is the most important part because the villain moves the plot, and they present an obstacle to the protagonist in a series of challenges, whether they're like mortal or immortal, that result in either like victory or tragedy. And I think in episode 2, the number one criticism I've heard from people is that there's not a defined antagonist until the end, sort of, with like Count Dooku and the separatists. And so a lot of people, they don't really appreciate the cloak. I don't know how you feel about it. The cloak and dagger of the beginning with the assassination plots and stuff. People just don't really enjoy it. For one, I actually really enjoyed that. I don't need like a Darth Vader in front of me. But that's why people really like the original movies, because your enemy and your antagonist are clearly defined, and they're ruthless, and they're making moves, and they're clearly trying to exterminate the protagonist. And that is always a more riveting story than for the majority of audiences, and for most people mythologically, than like, say, a hidden enemy that isn't really well defined, or maybe the story kind of meanders and beats around the bush a lot until maybe there's a revelation at the very end.
Fair. Reasonable. Let's pivot a little bit, because I feel like we could beat Star Wars to death,
Oh yeah, it has been.
As we find in the chat, sometimes I like to find a tweet, an incendiary tweet, and just lob it in there just to get people going.
Mm-hmm.
But let's talk about your work. Let's hear about what you have been working on, what you're getting ready to release. We've gotten to see the cover. Tell us maybe about your process on making the cover, when people can expect to get the book, anything that you feel is important in regards to this new release.
The cover is not important, except for us to draw. All I want to draw people in. So I felt like going for like the old school fiction covers with like not necessarily a twist, but just like bold, dramatic colors, heavy metal inspired, like just all the same stuff you would have expected. There is a bird on the cover, so unfortunately, I'm being lumped into the other young adult fiction authors, all the women who have ravens and crows. At least it's an eagle. That's my only defense. It's an eagle. It's not a crow. I had never written or read any of those books, by the way. That whatever they're all the various crow, raven, books. I don't know what they're really about, but I've heard.
I'm not even necessarily sure I know what you're talking about.
It's like the throne of birds. They're like, it's all this like sort of new, like imagine like you walk into a Target and you are looking in the fiction series. That's what's going to be in the front of it. Like you go into a Walmart and that's like what the books you'll see.
I think I do know who you're talking about. It's like they're like George Martin ripoff titles, right?
Yeah, they are. And they're George Martin ripoff titles sans any of the interesting dialogue or like intrigue of Game of Thrones, which is the only reason why people actually enjoy those books.
I thought they were basically like medieval
War of Roses and fantasy stuff. Yeah.
Romantasy.
Oh, those ones.
Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. I'm not sure what all we're talking about. I haven't read them.
I'm making fun of my own cover.
I'm speculating here.
I poke a little fun. I can't be a super serious poster.
So we can expect a strong romance story in Pray for the Birds, is what I'm hearing.
I think there's like 3 women in the book. It's very Master and Commander coded. It's a war fantasy book. There doesn't need to be romance in it. There's going to be romance in the second book, but for he has to get married for other reasons. It's a political thing. I'm not going to get into it. All I'll say is that
you're not going to spoil the plot right here on the program.
Polygamy might be involved, and I'll leave it at that. So the book comes out next month. If you want
June.
In June. June 20th. Yeah, June. I don't know when this is going to drop. So June.
This will come out in June as well.
Okay, so this month it comes out in, future me is saying this comes out this month in a few weeks. If you want a blurb, as far as what to expect, since we're talking about other, critiquing other books and other fiction series, this book coming out is, I think how I described it on Twitter is it's Game of Thrones without libtardism. It's Kingdom of Heaven without the anti-war, pro-Islam propaganda. It's Black Company if Glenn Cook was obsessed with sand and like the anti-Anakin. And that's about it. I mean, the series focuses on one guy who just simply can't be killed. Well, he can be killed. It's just that's the kind of the hook is he can't die, and he gets marched off into this desert, this realm, outside of his own knowledge and purview. All he knows is he's like he was basically forced here to this place, and then soon quickly realizes that it's not really all he was hoping it would be. Although, to be fair, he kind of assumed he just kind of died drinking, so he didn't really expect to have a whole long escapade in the desert. This is 100% everything that happens in this book was how it happened in our game. This was meant to be a throwaway character, and he somehow lived way longer than he should have, and that's all. I'll leave it at that. As far as like his as the main character, his name's Rooster. He's a middle-aged guy. He was not necessarily a good lord. He was kind of a bad dude, and now he has like a lot of regrets in his life, and now he's kind of forced to figure out what's going on in this whole like desert landscape. So it's very much like it's a white man in foreign land. I'd say is like whatever they call that trope.
Lawrence of Arabia.
Lawrence of Arabia is a huge influence. Yeah, I love Lawrence of Arabia. It's probably one of my favorite movies of all time. You scroll through my tweets, you'll see that like I just made a whole tweet about how you couldn't even remake that movie. Besides the fact there's no Peter O'Toole's that exist anymore, or Al Guinness to Muslim face, what we want to call it. It's not really black facing; it's kind of like brown facing. Which, by the way, Al Guinness was phenomenal. Still in that movie, I don't care what you say. But yeah, it's kind of like Lawrence of Arabia. The difference between Lawrence of Arabia though and Pray for the Birds is Lawrence of Arabia. Lawrence is he's enamored, in love with the desert, and he's very pure, and he is quickly like all that romanticism about the desert is banished very quickly and replaced with this sort of shell-shocked like realism at the end, where he's endured what many people do in war and kind of come back kind of a broken person. That's my takeaway of Lawrence Arabia. This in Pray for the Birds is not like that. Rooster already doesn't like this is a I don't I obviously like the way that my characters talk is what you see a lot of like in like say for in Glenn Cook's example where uh, I try to make it I don't try to Shakespeare it. The characters talk like how you'd have troops talk now. If you were with a bunch of Marines in Iraq, they're not going to talk all fancy and they're not going to be extremely these are essentially levies or mercenaries. They're not well read men. They're not polished. They don't go and drink wine and go to balls. They're not men of high esteem or class. They're basically hacking an existence out in the desert for coins, killing people for money, and just trying to survive. So that's how the kind of the grounded dialogue that I use. But on top of that, the morality I don't try to inject a morality like a modern morality where we're not used to death. Where in like the medieval period, like people were much more accustomed to death, and it wasn't this great shock. Which in some ways, Game of Thrones, I think, kind of is disappointing. Where like death is more of a reality, but like if you watch the TV show, the way it's described, even in the books too, the way it's described is it in a way sometimes it starts to feel like death is like the shock when like in the old times it wasn't and had greater meaning to it. So and of course like it's more of like a grittier fantasy, but there's your typical fantasy elements in the book. I do strongly gravitate towards the darker. I'm a huge fan of H.P. Lovecraft. I'm a huge fan of horror. So there's definitely more horror elements you'll find in Pray for the Birds than your typical like fantasy series. I'll say that for sure.
That's interesting.
Bad guys are bad. Bad guys are very, very bad. Like they're not just like, oh, they're bad guys and they wear black. Like no, they're really fucking bad. They're horrible.
So, are there any things that we haven't heard about from you that you feel we should know, or any closing thoughts?
I'm a crazy person. That's why I wrote a 500-page book in 2 months.
That's ripping, honestly.
We're ripping. Yeah, we're ripping. I took a break from I basically closed up shop my company and said I'm like goodbye everyone for these few months. I'm just gonna write. That's basically what I did. No, I would just say I encourage people to read. I really enjoy writing. Uh, I've had a lot of different readers over time. I think I mentioned this to you before we started, but like I've lived like 4 different lives as a writer. I started as a fiction writer. I started writing nonfiction. I kind of dabbled in religious, and now I'm back to fiction. So we came full circle. And yeah, I am a huge advocate, and I'm a fan of this space. I love the self-published. I love the anti-trad publishing people. I wish everybody in this space the best of luck and immense success because they deserve it. Because everyone here writes very, very well. And if they haven't written very well yet, they will soon. I've seen a lot of people in the space improve. Like their writing has become really good. And I think that this happens in a way. I think that like the self-publishing sphere, I think it only gets better from here because people are tired of what they're being what's being forced upon them. And even though the writing and reading have kind of taken they've hit a lower point because of like just because of the modern age, like digital age, like people have lower attention spans and they're watching TikTok and stuff and they're not necessarily reading. I think there's been a huge comeback with audio. We're talking about audiobooks offline, just about that and how I mean people are just eating up audiobooks left and right. And so I think I guess like I would probably just echo what you were saying to me honestly, which is like you've made me want to really double down on audiobooks and just really get them out there and get some really good professional sound out there for my works. I think everyone else should be doing that because they can grow their audiences and hopefully, I mean, God willing, we can put trad publishing out of business, and then we can become the next trad publishers. We'll see what happens.
Well, hey, Clawson, I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for telling us about your background in writing, the craft of writing, and, obviously the new books. Looking forward to Pray for the Birds. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll talk again before too long.
Thank you.